Right now, there is a 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran. 2 weeks, announced by President Trump on April 7th, accepted by Iran, and already under serious strain. A 2-week ceasefire is not peace, it is a timeout, and both sides are using it to reload, not to negotiate. What follows is a step-by-step breakdown of exactly what happens when this thing starts again. Every fact in it is already on the ground. To understand where this is going, you need to understand where it started. The United States, Iran, and a group of world powers signed the nuclear deal, the JCPOA. Iran agreed to cut its enriched uranium stockpile by 98%, reduce its operating centrifuges by 2/3, and open its facilities to international inspectors. In return, Iran received roughly $100 billion in sanctions relief. That arrangement held for 3 years. In 2018, President Trump pulled the United States out entirely, calling it insufficient because it left Iran's ballistic missile program and regional behavior completely untouched. Washington reimposed sweeping sanctions. Those sanctions cut Iranian oil exports by more than half. And the economic damage that followed strengthened the faction inside Iran that had always argued resistance was the only option worth taking. Iran's response came slowly at first, then accelerated. By late 2023, Iranian centrifuges were producing uranium enriched to 60% purity at roughly 9 kilograms per month. Weapons-grade material sits at 90%. But nuclear analysts concluded Iran had accumulated enough 60% material that further processing could yield enough for several nuclear devices. Not one, several. June 2025 is when the public diplomacy ran out entirely. The IAEA formally declared Iran in violation of its non-proliferation obligations for the first time in roughly 20 years. Iran responded by announcing plans for a new secret enrichment site. Israeli strikes hit Iranian nuclear facilities, missile plants, and senior military officials almost immediately. Then came June 21, 2025. A date that changed the historical record permanently. The United States joined Israel in bombing 3 of Iran's most sensitive nuclear sites, Fordow, Isfahan, and Natanz, marking the first time an American president directly struck another country's nuclear program in coordination with a partner nation. Iran retaliated. A ceasefire followed. That ceasefire collapsed almost as fast as it formed. By February 28, 2026, full-scale war was underway. The opening strikes reportedly killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Within hours, his son Mojtaba Khamenei had been appointed to replace him. Iran declared total war the same day. The current ceasefire rests on a 15-point proposal the United States delivered to Iran through Pakistan as an intermediary, tying sanctions relief and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to Iran, rolling back its nuclear program and pulling back its missiles. Trump officials went further in public, floating the idea of deploying special operations forces into Iran to physically retrieve enriched uranium stockpiles. Iran's position is not complicated. The regime survives or nothing gets signed. Accepting American terms at this stage would look, and Tehran's leadership understands this clearly, like unconditional surrender dressed in diplomatic language. What makes the ceasefire even more unstable is what Iran has already done with the Strait. After briefly reopening it, Iran closed it again. Reports out of the region indicate some vessels are now passing through only after paying Iran directly, sometimes in Chinese yuan, sometimes in cryptocurrency. That is not a country preparing to compromise. That is a country demonstrating exactly how much it can squeeze and for how long. The gap between what Washington demands and what Tehran will accept is not a negotiating gap. It is a strategic chasm, and 2 weeks is nowhere near enough time to cross it. Step 1. The Strait of Hormuz becomes a weapon again. About 20 million barrels of oil and petroleum products move through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That accounts for roughly a quarter of all the world's seaborne oil trade and about 1/5 of total global consumption. When Iran closed it earlier in this war, crude prices spiked above $100 a barrel. The International Energy Agency released around 400 million barrels from strategic reserves just to slow the damage. Here is what that response cannot fix. The bypass pipelines that exist to reroute Gulf oil around the strait can handle roughly 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day combined. That is the total available capacity. The shortfall between 20 million barrels of daily flow and 5.5 million barrels of bypass capacity is not closable with existing infrastructure. A sustained closure does not produce a temporary price spike. It creates a structural break in global energy supply that strategic reserves can soften but cannot solve. Around 70 to 82% of the oil flowing through Hormuz heads to Asian markets. China, India, Japan, and South Korea receive the largest shares. Japan sources roughly 75% of its oil from that region, which means a prolonged closure does not slow the Japanese economy gradually, it stops it. And when the world's third largest economy seizes, the financial shockwaves reach every market on the planet within days. The strait is not just a waterway, it is the single most consequential choke point in the global economy, and Iran has already demonstrated it is willing to use it as a weapon and charge tolls to reopen it. Step 2. The proxy army activates. Iran built its regional network over decades through the Quds Force, the external operations arm of the Revolutionary Guards, which trained and funded an estimated 140,000 to 185,000 partner fighters across Afghanistan, Gaza, Lebanon, Pakistan, Syria, and Yemen. Hezbollah, the Houthis, and an array of Iraqi Shiite militias all operate within that structure. All of them have both the motivation and the weapons to act simultaneously. Hezbollah entered this conflict having already absorbed real punishment from sustained Israeli air and ground operations. Pre-war estimates put the group's arsenal at 130,000 to 150,000 rockets and missiles. By early 2026, Israeli and independent assessments had reduced that figure to somewhere between 11,000 and 25,000 projectiles. That reduction matters. But 25,000 rockets aimed at Israel from Lebanon, combined with Iranian ballistic missiles arriving from the east, still carries the potential to saturate layered air defense systems through sheer volume. The Houthis in Yemen demonstrated their reach long before the 2026 war started. More than 90 commercial vessels attacked in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. Over 2,000 ships diverted away from that corridor. Suez Canal container traffic fell by 72% in November 2024 compared to the year before. That destruction of global shipping came from one proxy group, operating before full-scale war had even begun. Add Hezbollah, add the Iraqi militias, which conducted over 200 attacks on U.S. and Israeli targets in Iraq and Syria during the Gaza war period alone. And the picture of what Iran can activate across multiple fronts simultaneously becomes very clear. This is not a single front conflict waiting to restart. It is a network spanning 6 countries waiting for the order. Step 3. The U.S. has 50,000 troops in the region, and the ground question has no clean answer. By late March 2026, the United States had surged its regional presence to more than 50,000 troops, roughly 10,000 above normal peacetime deployment levels. 2,500 Marines and 2,500 sailors aboard the USS Boxer and accompanying warships formed a significant portion of that buildup. Reporting from multiple outlets placed thousands of soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division on standby as a contingency for potential ground operations. Airstrikes can degrade Iran's military capacity. They can damage nuclear sites, knock out air defenses, and strike oil infrastructure. What airstrikes cannot accomplish is guaranteeing that a dismantled nuclear program stays dismantled, compelling a government to surrender, or holding the territory needed to enforce any post-war arrangement. The ground option sits in every military planning document without a name anyone wants to say out loud. Because the moment it moves from contingency to operational order, the scale of this conflict shifts completely. And the consequences of that shift are the kind that planners can model but cannot fully predict. There is no clean version of a ground operation in Iran. There is no quick version. There is no version that does not fundamentally change what this war is and what it costs. Step 4. The economic damage reaches American households. The UN Development Program estimated the fighting across the broader Middle East region could cost between $120 and $194 billion in lost economic output, a regional GDP decline of roughly 3.7 to 6%. Those numbers were calculated before a potential restart, which means they represent a floor, not a ceiling. Oil above $100 a barrel does not stay contained to the Middle East. It raises fuel costs for American trucking companies, which pass those costs to grocery distributors, which pass them to the person standing at the checkout line. Inflation that appeared to be retreating comes back. The IMF has already warned that prolonged regional fighting could raise global food and fertilizer prices while disrupting supplies of materials used in semiconductor and electric vehicle production. The combined disruption of both Hormuz and the Red Sea, being contested simultaneously, forces global shipping to reroute around Africa, adding 10 to 14 days to major trade lanes, pushing insurance premiums sharply upward and slowing the delivery of goods into ports across the world. None of that stays contained to the region where the fighting happens. It lands in American supply chains, American prices, American paychecks. Every single week the strait stays closed, the damage compounds quietly, and the people who feel it first are not politicians or military planners. They are ordinary people filling their tanks and buying groceries. Step 5. The human cost climbs to numbers that are hard to say out loud. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations reported more than 1,500 civilians killed inside Iran since the war began, with 3.2 million people internally displaced. The independent human rights activist news agency placed the death toll significantly higher, figures that remain difficult to fully verify because nationwide internet blackouts and restricted access have limited outside confirmation. On the American side, 13 U.S. service members had been killed as of early April 2026. In Israel, 2 people died from a Hezbollah missile strike on Haifa. 4 were wounded in a separate strike on Tel Aviv. Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the UAE all reported strikes on refineries, desalination plants, and petrochemical facilities. During the same period, Iran fired intermediate-range ballistic missiles toward Diego Garcia, the joint U.S.-United Kingdom military base in the Indian Ocean. 1 missile failed, 1 was intercepted, but the test itself communicated something specific. Iran was demonstrating a range that Western governments had not fully accounted for. And that demonstration carries weight in every planning meeting that follows. This is not a war being fought in a distant place that does not affect you. 7 Americans are already dead. Prices are already higher. Supply chains are already slower. And the ceasefire that is supposed to be pausing all of this is already cracking. The ceasefire exists on paper. The United States is demanding Iran dismantle its nuclear program and cut off the proxy network it spent decades building. Iran is demanding it stops being bombed and that its government survives. Neither side has moved toward the other's position. Iran has already reclosed the Strait of Hormuz after briefly reopening it. Reports indicate ships are now paying direct tolls to Iranian authorities just to pass through. And the clock on the 2-week window is running faster than anyone in Washington wants to admit. Iranian parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf stated Iran's position in plain language. If American forces strike Iranian power plants, Iran will completely close the Strait of Hormuz, and critical infrastructure across the region will be, in his exact words, irreversibly destroyed. Irreversibly destroyed. That single word is doing enormous work in that sentence, because it is not a negotiating position with room built in. That is a government telling you, in advance on the record, exactly what it intends to do and exactly how far it intends to go. Now you understand what the strait closing again actually costs. You understand what the proxy network activating across 6 countries looks like. You understand what 50,000 American troops on standby means when the airstrikes stop being enough. You understand what oil above $100 does to the grocery bill of someone in Ohio or Birmingham who has never once thought about the Strait of Hormuz. And now you understand why the ceasefire clock is running faster than anyone in Washington wants to admit. This is not over. This is not close to over. The 2-week window is not a path to peace. It is the pause before the next phase. And the next phase, based on every fact already on the ground, looks nothing like the ending everyone celebrated on April 7th. Stay with this story because it is nowhere near finished.